Hi there, listener, and welcome to episode 169 of the Ski Podcast. This is a special episode. I was joined by Leigh, presenter of BBC's Ski Sunday, and we talked about all sorts of things, ranging from the Ski Sunday season to date, which took him from the strip of snow at Adelboden to the roaring crowds at Schladming. We talk about the impact of global warming on ski seasons. Ed is an ambassador for DS UK. We talk about how you can help raise funds for them. We discuss splitboarding in Courchevel and the impending World Championships coming up in Les Trois Vallées, and also the Natural Selection Tour. We also go back to the glory days when he went sailing on ice with Simon Le Bon in BBC's High Altitude, and finish off discussing a very nasty injury he had in Laax. It was a pleasure to chat with Ed. So with no more ado, let's have a listen to our conversation. So I'm really excited to be joined by Leigh from BBC's Ski Sunday. Hi Ed, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Iain. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. Whereabouts are you joining us from today?
I am in a friend's house, Chris Moran, I think a mutual friend, and he bought a ramshackle barn, must be 3, maybe even 4 years ago now, and he's 5 years ago. He's just shouted at me from the background. And he's done the most incredible job. It's one of those buildings that almost certainly would have had cattle sleeping under some very cold residents a couple of 100 years ago. And he's renovated it, and you've got this huge view from Val Morel right across to the Vallées National Park, sort of east of Courchevel. It's stunning.
So you're in the French Alps. I worked out from that, and I do know where Chris lives, above Bezel. And I mean, you've been pretty busy this winter. I mean, I've been following your exploits on Ski Sunday, because it started off in Adelboden and then Wengen, Kitzbuhel. I watched the Schladming night slalom in the morning. Has it been pretty full on, moving from resort to resort across the season?
It has, but it's been wonderful, because this is the first time since we got the Ski Sunday 2020 series away just before COVID struck. If you cast your mind back, the World Championships were due to be held in China as an Olympic test event in that 2020, and they weren't able to run it. But we did. That was the last season where we followed all of the racing. Since then, it's been either locked in one resort, or it's been an abbreviated season that was cut short by the Olympics. So going back out, chasing the World Cups, doing a proper season, it's been lovely. It's hectic, it's really busy, but it's such a privilege.
It looks like you and Chemi are having fun at these different venues. The atmosphere, I think I recall from this week's Ski Sunday, is it 40,000 people you get at that night slalom at Schladming?
I don't know exactly the numbers, but they were expecting 50. And we're seeing that at a lot of places. There's definitely, if you wanted to look a little bit behind the velvet rope, there's a different atmosphere at the races. The joie de vivre, maybe, and the kind of little flourishes that you'd see somewhere like Wengen, where they have the chestnuts out, and there's people having house parties all the way along the road that you walk down to get to the finish area. They weren't there. The crowds are bigger, but I don't know how you'd describe it, a little bit sharper, a little bit chippier, maybe a little bit drunker at times. But Schladming did feel, last week, the night slalom in Schladming felt like a return to normal almost. But Wengen, certainly, there was a little bit of a different feel to it. And Adelboden, definitely. If you cast your mind back, that was when the winter was yet to start, and it felt... I felt it just personally on myself. It was quite a sort of, we're forcing this. And I found that first week quite scary.
Yeah, and to fill in listeners who didn't actually see that one, at Adelboden, it was at that particular time in mid to December to Christmas time, where there really were just strips of snow on the mountain. And for Adelboden, it was all artificial snow. There was no other snow on the mountain at all. And not a pretty sight. I think a lot of the British media got very excited and carried lots of stories about the end of skiing. Fortunately, we had a lot of snow after that. Yeah, I can understand how that could affect you like that, because I think actually on my next podcast, which I'm recording tomorrow, I don't quite know what order all of these are going to appear. I've got MacCallum from Protect Our Winters coming onto the podcast, and I think you're an ambassador for Protect Our Winters. Is that right?
Yeah. And I actually spent a couple of days with Lauren out here recently, and it's fascinating talking to her because she's incredibly pragmatic and non-judgmental, but she has so much insight into the challenges we face. And it's really refreshing because as one of the most well-educated people on this issue, she has hope, which is one of the things that really works for me. We spoke to a BBC weatherman on Ski Sunday who said for the last 50 years, we've seen an average decline of 8% in snowfalls every decade, which is a terrifying statistic. But you speak to Lauren and she will tell you that we can all make a difference. There's probably the most powerful thing you can do. We can all just go and voice our concerns to our MPs.
I might have got this from Greenpeace. It's hard to recall, but the optimism of the action is better than the pessimism of the thought. And I'm very much with Lauren in that respect. It is possible to change things. We know it's all achievable. It's just a matter of having the will to be able to do it. And organisations such as Protect Our Winters, collectively encouraging people to take that kind of action to make, I know they're very focused on systemic change rather than individual change per se, but I think they do a very good job in terms of their lobbying, and I guess we'll discuss that more in episode 168, whichever one it's going to be. But let me ask you about one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today. The reason for today's call is Disability Snowsport UK have launched a new fundraising campaign. Quite a long hashtag SkiBay for DSUK. I wonder if you could tell us what that is. What does that stand for?
Well, anyone who uses eBay regularly knows that you have that drop-down menu when you're listing your item as to how much, if you want to give any percentage of the sale to charity. And Disability Snowsport UK hooked onto the idea that there's so much ski gear. Like it's one of those really, like mountain biking, it's a really gear intensive sport. And there is so much gear hanging around in people's garages. If you want to help out, it's so simple. Just chuck some gear on eBay. You choose what percent, anything from 10 to 100% of the sale price will go directly to Disability Snowsport UK as soon as you sell that item. So it's a really, really easy way of making a difference for a charity who do so much incredible work. So like you say, long hashtag, but a really, really simple premise.
So for sure. And I guess the kind of twin advantage there that I really like about it as well is we're talking about the circular economy here as well. So you can be raising funds for a good charity for Disability Snowsport UK. But at the same time, it's not like you're necessarily stopping people buying something new, but you're giving them the opportunity to buy something, pre-loved. And it's one of those areas, I'm very motivated to reduce my emissions and to reduce my carbon footprint. And in the last year, I have got much better at this, going through that massive pile of stuff that I've got in the cupboard and actually trying to, sell some of it. And I'm not really too fussed about necessarily how much money I get. I'd be much happier to know that someone was using it rather than it just being wasted, and certainly not going to chuck it away so it goes into landfill. Because we've had people on the show before. I remember talking to the guys from Hooski who are explaining that a lot of the stuff that you give away to charity shops doesn't end up in the charity shop and does end up in landfill in the long run. I mean, I'm guessing with a long career like yours, you've probably got a lot of spare stuff yourself. Have you listed any?
I have. I've got a snowboard that's going on next week. Really nice Salomon, but that'll be on my social media channels as soon as I do that. But the main thing for me, I like the idea. I got my first ever holiday. I think I got it for 130 quid. With the coach, the lift pass, the accommodation and half board. There's this, I truly believe it's a misnomer. Yes, if you go to Courchevel or you go to Zermatt, you can go and spend 10, 15, 20 grand on a family holiday. But there, as you say, there are ways to do this. Like you can find cracks in all of these systems and you can do things cheaply. Chris Moran, where I'm staying now, he said he went into the déchetterie and found a Travis Rice Pro Model board that no doubt someone had cleaned out of a garage in Courchevel. There are layers, and the ski lifts do the exact same thing. Big European resorts, when they retire ski lifts, if you go and ski in New Zealand, in India, in South America, you'll find ski lifts that have had previous lives in North America or Europe. So this, as you say, the circular economy works on every scale for every layer of the industry for me. But yeah, to go back to your question, I'll have some gear going up. So if anyone keeps an eye on my social media channels, they'll see anything that I put up there. I've got a couple of boards to go.
Excellent. I'll put some links into the show notes for your social media channels so people can follow that. And I'll also put a link in there to, there's a really good campaign video, but a little bit more information about Disability Snowsport UK. I wondered if you could just elaborate on what that money would actually be used for.
It's lessons for anyone with a disability in the UK, and it makes such an incredible difference. I've met 5 or 6 of the people that they work with, and it's so liberating. It offers independence and dopamine to people who are starved of those in so much of their normal life, and things that a lot of us take for granted, or it's a choice for a lot of us. For them, it's something that they don't have access to. So I mean, we all know, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you have passion for the mountains, and we know the way mountains can change people's lives, and you can amplify that by hundreds of times when it comes to someone with a disability. So I'm so passionate about that. I met a guy called David last year who had requested to meet me because he said I was his hero, which I found obviously very humbling, but also very ironic when you consider that when you actually meet him and what he was going through just to be able to learn to sit ski was 10 times more than anything I've ever achieved. It was quite spectacular. And the work DS UK do is it's underfunded and oversubscribed. So they need this help. And this is a really easy way of helping them out.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I guess the key point to remember there, listener, if you've got any, ski stuff at home, whether it's your snowboard or ski pants or jackets, etc., that you don't use anymore, go onto eBay and then select Disability Snowsport UK, and that can contribute the funds to them.
Sorry to interrupt. It doesn't need to be ski gear. Obviously, they're going for the ski market, but you can sell anything, and you select them. So you can sell your dog, your plants. Your kids.
Excellent. Well, I think people are much more open to the idea of selling and buying items that these days are pre-loved. It used to be called second-hand, but that doesn't sound quite as good as pre-loved. And my daughter's kind of like got her own little business going, selling things on Vinted and Depop, and certainly all of her friends, they love going out to kilo sales and car boot sales and things like this, looking for bargains. So there you go, listener. Whether it's your ski gear or your dog or anything else, you can sell it on eBay and raise funds for Disability Snowsport UK. Now, Ed, I'd like to... So you're in Courchevel just now, and I think you are in Courchevel because I can't remember the exact episode situation on the Ski Sunday, but I do know that the World Championships are coming up in the 3 Valleys very shortly. They will be hosted between Courchevel and Méribel between the 6th and the 19th of February. And I take it that's why you're there right now, is it?
Well, it's very close to. We get Schladming, actually, the night race takes place on the Tuesday night. So by the time we've tidied up there, we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off before we go to the next race. And you're obviously in Eastern Austria, and then there's a slalom in Chamonix next week, and then we're here for the World Champs. But I thought I'd come over and have a little look around. The French Alps got the best of the last snowfall. And the good news is, across the Alps, it stayed incredibly cold. We've had average temperatures here of around -10 for the last 4 or 5 days. North Face is down to 700 or 800 meters of maintained snow. It's the longest sustained cold period I've seen in the Alps for a while. So it's been glorious snow up here still. We've been touring around, splitboarding, and really enjoying ourselves. But it's back to work tomorrow in Chamonix. There's a slalom down into Les Houches. And then, as you say, we'll be back here, the World Championships. I'm really fascinated. It will be an amazing test of the world's largest ski area. They've got the Alpine Ski World Championships during half term. So it's a logistical challenge is the way I would say it. But looking at what they've got here and the way it's set up, I think it's going to be spectacular.
I'll come back to the World Championships because I do have a bit of inside info on that. But you mentioned that you were ski touring. And actually, in the green room before chatting just now, you told me that you bought a ski touring pass. And I have to admit, although I think I know a reasonable amount about the three valleys and ski, I didn't even know that they sold a separate three valleys, or in this case, Courchevel ski touring pass. What does that cover then?
It's so interesting. Very few resorts actually advertise that they have a ski touring pass. You have to ask, and sometimes it might take one or two asks, or them asking, depending on who the attendant is, them asking a superior. But in Courchevel, it's usually what it will entail is allowing you to get to a high point, which gives you access to the backcountry behind the resort. And in Courchevel, that is, I think, one of the best resort accessed ski touring areas I've ever seen, especially for beginner intermediates. It's very, very straightforward, huge area. If you wanted to go and try out overnight refuge trips, it's there. It's truly a spectacular area, and you pay €29 versus 65 for a standard day pass, which would just cover Courchevel. I think it's about 70, 71 for three valleys. But the €29 will let you up the Ariond, then you go Aiguille de Free, and then Shanrossa. And then that takes you out to what would be the most eastern point of the three valleys. And you have access then to this huge bowl, and you can just tour around under your own steam out there. And you have access back to the corner of the resort. And if you park your car on that side, then you can come in as late as you want at night or stay out for a couple of days. So it's a very, very economic way to make the most of the mountains.
Excellent. Well, that is a really a good tip, and I didn't know about it. I do know about some of the ski touring or the skiing over in that area there, because I think some of it goes through, is it called the Col de Portetta?
Yep, that's one of them. I mean, you go and look on one of the resources like FatMap, which I'm using increasingly. Like I almost live on it. It's like I started looking at other maps, and you start sort of trying to move them around. We had some drone footage, and I found myself trying to move the drone footage like it was FatMap. Portetta is the eastern boundary in between the big valley, the Vallées National Park, which sits, I mean, the resorts around here, there's a horseshoe of resorts. Val d'Isère, Les Arcs, La Plagne, Courchevel, Méribel, Val Thorens sit in a horseshoe around the Vallées National Park. And that central area, you can kind of dip into it from the back of any of those resorts. And it is just spectacular. And the thing I love about it, you can do it at your own pace. You've got, Portetta's actually quite, I'd say intermediate, but you've got these two giant rock spires. It's very similar to the Dolomites with the rock color, but it's flanked by these huge peaks. And you can sit out there. I would probably 10, 15 years ago have frothed over the lines. These days I go out and sort of just marvel at the beauty of it all. It's quite stunning.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that's one of the joys of ski touring anyway. I think regular listeners will know that I went and stayed in a refuge, basically a couple of valleys over from that in the Méribel area, stayed there overnight about a month ago, something like that, as an unmanned refuge. And I just ski toured up there just to really spend some time in the mountains away from the lift system. And that is the joy, just being able to have a little bit of the mountain to yourself. It's like maybe being a bit greedy about it, but that's that kind of peace and calm that you can't really get elsewhere. And, just for the benefit of the listener, we're talking about, I know you said way on the eastern side, so someone probably can visualize the Three Valleys map. We're talking about way over on the Courchevel 1650 side, to the left of that, even as you're looking at the map.
Yeah, exactly. And it's well worth going to have a look at. It's almost, if you looked at it on a map, the classic map facing north, it's almost like a teardrop that pops out on that eastern side. And that's the lovely part of it. It's a very big open bowl, so you can choose the amount of exposure and the length of the journey. There's some very, very basic, gentle stuff, but there are some curves up at the sides, and you look around you and you see, I mean, I did some fairly heavy free riding in my day, but there were some lines up there, and there was especially some touring tracks zigzagging up couloirs where you just think, no thanks, I'm all right actually for that. You can basically, your imagination is the only limitation up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think your risk threshold changes as you get older as well. I like the idea as well that you're referring to kind of like beginner and intermediate routes down. You're like, this is relative, right? We're not saying any beginners would head up there.
Well, no. If you're talking about a piste skier, but in terms of someone who's getting into ski touring, it's very, I'd call that sort of stabilizers ski touring, because in the event of any accident, anything happens, you've got the shelter of the 2 refuges, which are quite close. I'd say you're less than an hour from any kind of infrastructure if you need help. And it's very close. I think it's a 7-kilometer sort of gentle traverse, bit of walking, bit of skating to get out. So it's really, you're not very far off the beaten track, but you get a real, as you said, you still get that wonderful sense of isolation out there.
Now, you mentioned the World Championships, and I said I was going to come back to that. The Three Valleys, an area I know pretty well, and I've been looking forward to this event for quite a long time. But as you observed, it is going to be during vacances scolaires, half-term holidays, etc. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact that has. I do know that not many of the actual race piece are being taken off the piste map, so to speak. So you can still ski, a very large amount of the area, and a couple of places on the course in both Courchevel, the Eclipse, the downhill run, and then over in Méribel. I can't exactly remember what that one's called, but the women's downhill, there are tunnels that they've built underneath the actual course itself. So regular skiers can still keep skiing on their routes without being interrupted by the races themselves. But I was out in Méribel, like I said, early this month. And, they've built all of the stands there. They've got all the infrastructure in place. They're going to have free shuttles, and the gondola from Breche is going to be free going up during the day as well. I think one of the arguments is that because a lot of the people there, or a lot of the hotels, let's say, will be occupied by people who are either racing or who are media or associated with the races, there will actually be fewer general vacanciers, holiday makers in resorts, so therefore it could level out. But the only way we'll find out will be in practice. In
my experience, I've done 6 or 7 World Championships, and obviously follow the World Cup. It's really only the Swiss and the Austrian teams, and a sprinkling of media who still have the kind of budgets which would allow them to accommodate themselves in resort. Most people, Ski Sunday included, we will stay out of resort. There are a couple of exceptions where somewhere like Wengen, where you just can't get access to the resort quickly enough from down the valley. But Adelboden, we stay in Interlaken. Kitzbuhel, we're quite a long way out of town each time. We're going to stay here in Beauzel on the other side of the valley. So, and that goes for, let's say you bring in 2,500 to 2,500 people for a World Championships. I'd say 80 to 90% of them will be staying Breche, Les Alaux, Moutier, Beauzel areas. They won't be clogging up resort beds, but they will. And I think, as you said, the Three Valleys is such a vast area. It's so well designed, and they manage it so well that you can cast away up. As the moment you get out of Monterey or you're out of La Praz, then the ski area is wide open. So there shouldn't be too much pressure there. I think the one thing that will probably, if you're coming here, that you want to plan around is parking. That will be at a premium. If people are staying outside resorts, there's going to be a lot of traffic coming in. And people carrying a lot of cameras, ski gear, wax techs, and not using buses. So there's going to be a lot of cars up in resort.
Well, for sure. Well, we'll see how that works out. Now, obviously, we're talking about here the Alpine Ski World Championships. There's no snowboarding going on. I think I heard you say in another podcast, the Excellent Looking Sideways with Matt Barr, that you don't actually watch much of the racing when it's on Ski Sunday.
I watch a little bit of it. I watch the big races, and I watch it when there's a big story there. I'd say I'm a casual fan. But you temper that with the fact that each weekend, Shemi will absorb every piece of alpine skiing that's going on. I'm doing exactly the same with all of the freestyle, the park and pipe stuff. So we've got the Alpine World Championships, but running parallel, clipping that second weekend of the Alpine World Championships will be the park and pipe freestyle World Championships in Georgia. Then the natural selection duels kick off, and then natural selection kicks off. We've just had X Games. So it's having, in this era of saturated content, it's having the bandwidth to take everything in. So, I do prioritize, would be the way of diplomatically saying it.
But so I guess Chemi and Graham will be, covering most of the racing. What will your focus be on then before the GP Park and Pipe Champs start up?
Mostly I'll be looking at natural selection duels. That's my favorite competition at the moment. It's the backcountry freestyle contest, and they have their 8 qualified men, 4 qualified women from the Alaska event last year. They'll go up against 8 new men and the 4 new women. But it's a different format. Usually they'd have that in Jackson Hole in Wyoming. But this year, the pre-qualified 12 riders get to choose wherever they want to host the event. So there'll be 12 different locations where riders go in and all they have to do is pick a face with 2 hits. One of them has to be natural, and they get 4 goes at it. Sounds quite complex, but essentially, as a viewer, you'll get to see 2 riders going head-to-head in totally fresh terrain. And there'll be 12 of those duels through February. So I am looking forward to those so much. They're the best natural, you'd say, the best snowboarders in the world, in my eyes, because they can do all of the freestyle tricks, but they do that on natural terrain. So many times it will be first hit.
Right. Okay. And will you be featuring that on Ski Sunday? Will you, natural selection?
No, unfortunately, I have a gigantic bee in my bonnet at the moment. The FIS, the International Ski Federation, have elected a new president, and he's come in on the back of a mandate to sort out the television rights, which they belong to each individual ski federation, but save going into a dark and murky swamp, those rights need to be sorted out, because we lost the rights to the Laax Open, Europe's biggest freestyle competition, 2 weeks ago, and we don't have the freestyle ski rights either, because they're being sold to national federations, and it makes it, they get sold and then resold to on-demand channels who you can't find anywhere. They won't answer emails or conversations about selling rights, highlights packages. So it's so frustrating when all you want to do is promote your sport, and then people are buying these rights at extortionate rates, but they're not wanting to actually let anyone see them. It seems so counterproductive to me.
I can see how that would be, really frustrating. But personally, I like the format of Ski Sunday. I'm less interested in the racing. I tend to fast forward a lot through the racing itself. I'm much more interested in the features. Those elements, like, for example, Tim Warwood did some splitboarding in Scotland with Lauren, who we mentioned earlier, and the Mount Noir feature. I thought that was really interesting. I've interviewed Winona on the podcast before from that. Those sort of things, to me, it's that's a more interesting element, getting behind the scenes of just racing. I appreciate, that's probably what over 45 years of Ski Sunday people have tuned in for, perhaps. But what I really used to love, and it's such a shame this doesn't happen anymore, was when you and Graham ran, I think it was a separate program called High Altitude. You remember that?
I remember it well. It was in that era of TV where challenges, the sort of Top Gear challenge, was very much a part of the formatting. But and I remember it really fondly. It was an incredible time. When I started Ski Sunday in 2007, they'd got this ski format that worked, and they didn't really know what to do with me. So I started experimenting. There was a cameraman called Chris Kirkham, aka Zoid, who I'd known for a while, really good snowboarder and brilliant cameraman. And we went down to New Zealand in the off season, and I said to him, look, we should just do some stuff. And I mentioned it, and we did a piece on Snow Park down there, the resort, it was single chairlift, and it was just a snow park. And we did a piece on how you can go skiing, snowboarding, surfing, and skateboarding in a day there. And the producers really liked that, so we brought it up. We carried on with that theme in 2008, and we went and found all of the ski fields in central Siberia that are actually mining towns. But because Putin was so passionate about skiing, he'd incentivized mining permits if you built a ski resort. So you can go through Siberia and find all of these crazy little ski resorts. So we went and did that. We went sandboarding in Morocco and started exploring those elements. And High Altitude was born out of that. Graham at the same time was doing some challenges. I think he'd raced across Greenland ski touring. So they saw this coming and thought, okay, we'll do that. And it's funny that you mentioned those cultural elements being your favorite. I feel very strongly now that I didn't have the experience as a broadcaster to recognize what High Altitude should have been. I was a little too green on the program. I didn't have enough maturity. And we bit off more than we could chew in terms of what we could do in the time we had with the money we had. So it was really good. I think if you were a passionate mountain man, mountain person, but I would love to have another go at High Altitude now and make something that reflected the culture of the mountains as we show it on Ski Sunday now.
Yeah, to be able to expand on some of those areas that you've touched on now. Well, I happen to have one of the pages up in front of me at the moment, and you covered things like crossing Iceland and taking Simon Le Bon to go sailing. I think it was on St. Moritz, was it, or something like that?
No, it was that was one of the most incredible weekends. We went up to a frozen lake in Sweden, central Sweden, and you've essentially got a giant ice skate blade, about 60 centimeters long on a little not a trimaran, but you've got 3 blades on a triangle and not a big sail, but you needed less than 6 or 7 miles an hour of wind to create. There was so little friction that you could generate 2 or 3 times the wind speed. So I think on one of the final races, we got up to about 10 miles an hour of wind, which meant we were doing close to 30 miles an hour, which is great when you're sidling along. But the moment you came into the marks together and start jostling in close proximity was really scary. It was fantastic. I'd highly recommend that as a sport.
Well, it looked brilliant on screen. And I think, I don't know if it's on YouTube. It probably is on YouTube somewhere. Maybe I'll fish that out and put that into the show notes. But I do recall, flying somewhere long haul at one point, and High Altitude was one of the choices, on the in-flight entertainment. And I thought it was really perfect for that sort of thing. So the BBC are probably still syndicating it out somewhere. But maybe if we're lucky, you'll be able to convince them to do it again. Because I think I mentioned earlier, I think it is 45 years that Ski Sunday has been going now. And I couldn't exactly remember when you joined, but we're going to say 16 years ago. And another thing I heard you mention on Matt's podcast was that Ski Sunday has like a really high approval rating. Is that the right term for it?
Yeah, so the BBC do this, and different channels have different remits. So BBC One goes head-to-head with ITV, and it's about entertainment and mass audiences. You're looking for whatever pleases the most amount of people. Whereas with BBC Two, they focus in on special interests. So the goal is not having the biggest audiences, but having programming that really resonates with the viewers it does attract. So you get scored on different metrics on BBC Two, and they go for, they call it AI, but I think it's audience appreciation. And Ski Sunday consistently it's one of the highest scoring shows on BBC in that metric, because it really does resonate with people, and it's such a lovely thing to be a part of, because you whenever we meet people who watch it, they're always really passionate about it, and I'm really positive that a big chunk of it comes down to the fact that this is one of the few sports that people do where it doesn't matter, you do it together no matter the generation. It's not unusual to see parents and kids doing it at the same time, parents, kids and grandparents doing it at the same time. And they all get something from it. So you all go on the holiday, you may do it together, you may go off different places. Teenagers go and do one thing, parents do another, grandparents do another. But the program has the same appeal, where people still sit down and it's destination viewing. And I think that's one of the things that perennially hits the mark.
Well, I can back that up in our household, because, I mean, I guess my kids probably don't have so much choice, because I kind of get them to watch it, but they love the freestyle side of things. The racing itself, that's not particularly interesting, but if it comes to the Olympics, it's ski across, border cross. They're without doubt the most entertaining disciplines to watch. But when there is a freestyle of any description on, and you mentioned before the Park and Pipe team, the X Games, and I interviewed Mia Brooks at the Birmingham ski show, and oh God, I could not believe when I was interviewing her that she's doing her GCSEs this year, and I've got twins and they're doing GCSEs. So I came back from the Birmingham show and I said to them, this girl's going out to compete on the World Cup circuit. She's in the same year as you at school. I mean, I often feel old when I'm talking to, the freestyle athletes, because they tend to be a lot younger. But, that is, to me, the most exciting bit. It's so dynamic, that side of things. And, we have now I don't know if we're going into the second or maybe even the third generation of those very successful British freestyle athletes. It's very exciting to watch.
But so many of them, if you speak to them, it's that if you can't see it, you can't be it. And Ski Sunday Ski Sunday is probably the most high-profile mainstream, but every layer of ski media in the UK, for a country with no mountains, we're producing a lot of talent, and that comes from, I'm sure it was similar for you, but I hear this story so many times. People are like, oh, I got into it by watching. People just didn't have an idea, but they watched Ski Sunday and they're like, oh, that exists. I'll give that a try. We watched Ski Sunday with David Vine. My dad was passionate about it, and we all sat down to watch it. And they built Gloucester dry ski slope close to the house. So my dad was like, we're going to learn to ski. And my mum was a teacher. So we were able to tag on to the back of a school ski holiday, bargain basement. And that actually comes back to the first point we made about DSUK and eBay. I'm passionate about making the mountains affordable. I think that they have such a powerful ability to broaden people's horizons, metaphorically and literally, that it doesn't have to be really expensive. You can get out there and enjoy them. They are accessible. It takes a bit of ambition, a bit of hard work, but it's available to everyone. And I love that role that Ski Sunday fulfills, is to help people see what's possible there. And I that's one of the biggest privileges of being a part of the show, is that it inspired me, and now I know the effect it has on other people.
Yeah, and I think people clearly do have a real love for Ski Sunday, but sometimes they don't have any appreciation for what's going on, like off camera or behind the scenes. And I think when you were in Laax, where you were based there for the whole winter, I interviewed Chemi on the podcast. That winter, from you were mixing in a very small group. I think it was just yourself, the two of you, and Chris as well.
I'll just say this. You said mixing in a small group. We were actually under BBC protocol in 3 separate bubbles. So on screen, there had to be a 2-meter triangle between Shemi, Zoid, and I. And we were the only 3 people out there. So Shemi and I produced and directed it all, sent it back to Zoid sent it back to Manchester. But it was an incredibly isolating 7 weeks, essentially living on your own in these tiny apartments in a nearly empty ski resort. It should have been heaven, but it was very surreal.
Yeah, definitely a challenge, that people wouldn't necessarily consider at the time, and particularly, I think I'm right in saying, in some of the later episodes, you were, I guess, literally being propped up to get through the episodes because you had a pretty serious accident off camera.
It was just after the second show. I hit a tree stump in very deep snow. It was submerged, and part of me thinks I was lucky that it wasn't more serious, but it could have been it could have been the end of skiing and snowboarding for me. I dislocated my kneecap, broke my tibia, and clean snapped the medial and ACL. So I had 2 ligaments left, but not much else. We did a DIY knee relocation on site, and it took 2.5 hours to get me out of there because we were quite a long way off piste. But it was, that was challenging because already the situation was mentally challenging. But I hadn't, like a lot of people, I hadn't worked properly on doing the job I loved and did regularly for 9 months by then. So I was absolutely adamant I was going to make that happen. I was able to schedule surgery. It was quite severe, but they stabilized the leg. I was in a straight leg brace for 3 weeks, and we scheduled surgery. So the injury was, everything snapped so clean. I had a broken bone in there, but it was all pretty stable. I was able to get through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th shows quite well. And then I had the surgery, and the 6th and 7th shows were, the 6th especially, 5 days after surgery, this pulsating knee hanging off my... we do try and film the links, and if Shemi missed a line, she'd look at me and I'd be sort of melting into the floor. And the pressure on her to get her lines right was just phenomenal. I felt so sorry for her.
Just so you could take your weight off your feet. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. I'd had...
And the camera would still shoot you head to toe, would it? Or would it have to kind of go waist upwards?
No, we were all right. I'd just stand on one leg. I'd get a nice solid platform, and I could put a tiny bit of weight on it, but I'd just stand there. But we had to get to... We'd usually go sort of halfway and drive up to a spot where we could jump on snow and meet there. But yeah, it was definitely the hardest season of Ski Sunday we've ever filmed. But I was really proud that we were able to get through it. And I was I put a post up about it afterwards, but I was very adamant that it was such an important series to give people a bit of hope that it was still, the mountains were still out there and waiting for people to return. And I didn't want it to be pessimistic. So I thought at the time it was the right thing to do to keep it under wraps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, anecdotally, when I was doing the podcast through all of that winter season when everywhere was closed apart from Switzerland, where the lifts were open in Switzerland, I had so many comments and contact from listeners who were saying, thank you for keeping us in contact with the sport that we love. And for me personally, I found it really difficult not being able to not being able to go to the Alps, but like whether or not our industry was just going to come to a halt. My real job is digital marketing, and I work for ski companies, and is this it? Is it I'm going to have to be forced into early retirement? And so it was for me to be able to talk to people out in the Alps who were either ski touring, in France or skiing in Switzerland, etc. It helped me with my own mental health, during that season. And I think, it helped, some listeners as well.
We were ever so nervous when we went to air for the first show that were we doing something that was just rubbing people's noses in it, or was it something that people wanted to see, and we had the same response, universally positive. Like, thank goodness that there's something out there that isn't COVID. It was really, that was really reassuring.
Yeah, and you mentioned much earlier in our conversation, you live in New Zealand at least some of the time. After those lockdowns freed up, you were able to go back to New Zealand again. Will you go back to New Zealand at the end of this winter season as well?
Yeah, I'm currently working on the natural selections in late March, early March, and late March, early April. There's one in Revelstoke, 4th to the 11th of March, and then there's one in Alaska from the 26th to the 2nd or 3rd. 26th of March to the 2nd or 3rd of April. So I'll go back to New Zealand via the States doing those jobs. So and for me, as I mentioned, I'm so passionate about those. So getting to watch those. But like most live events now that happen in remote locations, you don't get to go on site. The broadcast teams sit at a hub. It saves on flights. It saves on resources. So I'll be sat in a studio in Santa Monica in California watching people in Revelstoke and Vallées. But no matter, I'm so passionate about it. It's a privilege to do that.
But you will be on your way back to New Zealand. So does that mean, I think, are you based in Wanaka or Queenstown? I can't remember.
Yeah, Wanaka. So I'd liken it to Bourg Saint-Maurice, but with a lake.
Yeah, no, I've been to Wanaka. It's a very, very beautiful place for sure. So does that mean that you get to have an endless season? You'll go straight from a Northern Hemisphere winter, slot into a Southern Hemisphere winter as well, then back again?
Yeah, there's about 6 weeks off on either side. I'll finish up in the States probably mid-April and then go back down there. So we'll have May, and then they try and open middle of June. And then our season went on until 20th of October in New Zealand this year. So, yeah, it was, again, very short period of time off snow.
And is that a very different experience when you're in New Zealand in, let's say, our summer? You're off the clock as far as Ski Sunday is concerned.
But on the clock for so many other things.
Right.
Presenting and commentating is post-pandemic, less of my career. It's always been, I'd say, probably 50 or 60%. On Ski Sunday, the presenting part is probably only about 20% of it. The other bit, it's about 70% baggage handling, pulling camera equipment and ski gear in and out of cars and trains.
Right.
And then I'm the resident chef on Ski Sunday as well. I cook for all of the crew. So I spend a lot of time in supermarkets and in front of... they used to... 2 seasons ago, they thought I was a brilliant chef, but they've realised that I just repeat. They've clocked onto the fact that I'm rotating the same 7 recipes by now. So
that does ring a bell. Because actually, when I spoke to Chemi, when she was in Laax, she was talking about one of your specialist meals. I'd have to listen to that episode again now to be able to remember what it was. But
I can tell you what it is, because I actually told her the recipe for it, and she cooked it for Dougie Crawford, her husband, for Valentine's Day. But it's a real cheat. It looks really fancy. It's cauliflower mash with feta cheese and watercress with some 5-spice lamb chops. And it sounds really fancy, but it takes about 15 minutes. It's really easy.
Excellent. Well, I can't think of a better way to sign off than Ed Leigh's recipe tips for surviving the season. Hey, look, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It'll be a special episode that we'll release. I'd like to really, I enjoy Ski Sunday. Like I say, I might fast forward a little bit through the racing, but all of those features and everything. So, really like to thank you and Chris and Chemi and the rest of the team for putting that together. And I wish you all the best for the World Championships and the rest of the season, for natural selection and for your time back in New Zealand. And listener, I'm just going to give you a final reminder that, you can sell anything on eBay and donate those your revenues, your profits to Disability Snowsport UK. So that's brilliant, Ed. Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Ian.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that special episode, listener. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any other episodes. And if you do enjoy the pod, don't forget you can buy me a coffee, if you so wish, at buymeacoffee.com/the Ski Podcast. You can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at the Ski Podcast. But for now, I would like to thank Ed for being so generous with his time. And finally, listener, thank you to you for joining us. And until next time, goodbye.